tell you like this. When I saw that, I think T.I. fucking lying.
Tell me. It been 20 years, bro. It been 20 years. I figure if I wasn't built like that, it'll show by now. It been 20 years, bro. I done faced every challenge motherfucker that like to throw at me, man. You ain't seen me fold, you ain't seen me break.
I gotta say something about this, bro. Dwayne Wade, you gone too fucking far, dog. That is a male. A 12-year-old. At 12, they don't even know what their next meal gonna be. They don't have it figured out yet. He might meet a woman, anything at 16 and fall in love with her. But it's be gone. How you gon' like, bro? You going too far, dog. Don't cut his off, bro. Like, bro, for real. If you gonna be gay, let him be gay. But don't cut his off, bro.
The courtroom was meant to be calm, a place ruled by order, etiquette, and structure, but all of that collapsed in an instant. One moment, the room held only the soft rustle of papers and the low murmurs of attorneys organizing their arguments. The next, a voice thundered across the chamber with such force it seemed to shake the air itself. T.I. stood up so abruptly that even the nearest court officer startled. His voice, normally controlled and deliberate, erupted raw and unfiltered, carrying a father's anguish and fury. Every head turned toward him. Lawyers shifted, unsure whether to intervene or stay quiet, while spectators instinctively leaned forward, sensing that something emotionally explosive had just begun. The judge slammed the gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but nothing could compete with T.I.'s anger. He wasn't speaking as a celebrity or an artist, but as a man terrified that he was losing his son. And all that fury was aimed at one person, Boosie. The accusation burst from T.I.'s mouth with the force of a detonation. He accused Boosie of manipulating King Harris, his son, his legacy, the child he had raised under the unforgiving glare of cameras and public attention. The claim struck the courtroom like lightning, sending a wave of shocked gasps through the gallery. People whispered urgently, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Some stared at T.I. with wide eyes, stunned that he would speak so openly in such a setting. Others turned toward Boosie to see how he would react. This wasn't hip-hop drama spilling into real life. It wasn't a diss track or a media stunt. It was a father fighting for his child in front of the world. To understand how the situation reached this boiling point, it's important to look back at the history between T.I. and Boosie. They weren't always adversaries. In fact, there was a time when they stood shoulder to shoulder, Southern artists rising together in an industry that didn't always welcome them. They shared stages, swapped stories, and crossed paths more often than most fans realize. But like many relationships in the entertainment industry, their friendship was complicated. Beneath their collaborations and public camaraderie lived tension fueled by pride, creative differences, and personal clashes. Still, with all their ups and downs, no one could have predicted that the biggest fracture in their relationship would center around King Harris. King wasn't just the son of famous parents. He was raised under the harsh spotlight of fame, his childhood broadcast on television, his teenage years scrutinized by millions, and his missteps magnified by social media. Over time, fans watched him develop a rebellious streak, one that both fascinated and worried people. He grew louder, more unpredictable, more determined to define himself outside his parents' expectations. And to T.I., watching that transformation felt like watching a slow-moving storm gathering strength. In T.I.'s eyes, one of the loudest voices pushing King toward chaos was Boosie. At first, their connection seemed harmless enough. Boosie had always been outspoken, unfiltered, and unapologetically himself, a man who embraced turbulence and wore defiance like armor. To a young man craving independence and excitement, being around Boosie probably felt thrilling. But for a father observing from a distance, it was terrifying. T.I. saw his son gravitating toward someone who glorified a lifestyle he had spent years trying to shield him from. He saw King becoming more defiant, more dismissive of guidance, more fascinated with the thrill of recklessness. By the time they were all in court, the tension between T.I. and Boosie had quietly swelled into something dangerous. T.I. had tried everything: conversations, discipline, guidance, but each attempt seemed only to push King further away. And from T.I.'s perspective, Boosie was stoking the fire. encouraging King's rebellious behavior rather than helping him find a stable path. So when T.I. finally snapped, it wasn't out of spite, but out of fear that he was losing his son to influences he couldn't control. As T.I. hurled accusations across the courtroom, Boosie leaned back in his chair with an expression that hovered between amusement and annoyance. On the surface, he looked unbothered, even entertained. He smirked. He shook his head slowly, almost dismissively. But beneath that front, something shifted. The words had struck him deeper than he wanted anyone to notice. He understood the weight of them, even if he refused to acknowledge it publicly. For all his bravado, he wasn't immune to the truth woven through T.I.'s anger. Outside, news of the courtroom confrontation spread like wildfire. Headlines exploded across the internet, drawing millions into the unfolding drama. Everyone had an opinion. Some sided with T.I., arguing that any father would fight fiercely to protect his child from harmful influences. Others defended Boosie, insisting that King was old enough to make his own decisions and that Boosie had no obligation to control or shape the young man's behavior. But even amid the arguments and debates, most people agreed on one thing: this situation had become much larger than music, larger than fame, larger than pride. For T.I., the pain wasn't just about influence or public image. It was about the fear every parent carries, the fear of losing their child to the world. King wasn't an ordinary teenager. Every decision he made became a headline. Every mistake spiraled into a viral moment. And with that kind of spotlight, the consequences of slipping too far off track were far more dangerous. T.I. had lived through some of the darkest parts of street life, clawed his way out, and built a legacy for himself and his family. Watching King flirt with the same dangers he had fought to escape felt devastating, like history threatening to repeat itself right in front of his eyes. From Boosie's perspective, however, the narrative was completely different. He saw himself not as a manipulator but as a mentor, a man who had survived hardships and wanted to offer authentic guidance. He prided himself on blunt honesty, on refusing to sanitize the realities of life. In his mind, he was showing King how the world truly worked, without the filters and sugarcoating he believed parents often relied on. But the problem with influence, particularly with someone as impressionable and identity-seeking as King, is that guidance and manipulation can look almost identical from the outside. The line between support and control blurs, especially when the young person receiving advice is still figuring out who they are. King, caught between two powerful voices, was walking a tightrope. Did he admire Boosie, or was he being shaped by him? Was he seeking independence, or was he drifting under the influence of someone who didn't answer to his family? These were the questions that haunted T.I. long after the courtroom emptied. They were the thoughts that kept him awake at night, wondering if he was losing his son inch by inch. Meanwhile, the internet dissected every detail relentlessly. Some commentators insisted that T.I. needed to accept that King was becoming an adult, even if adulthood came with mistakes. Others criticized Boosie, arguing that he was overstepping by inserting himself into another man's family affairs. And then there were the spectators who treated the entire situation like a show, eager for drama, blind to the fact that the story involved real people and real pain. But for T.I., this wasn't entertainment. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't a public spectacle. It was his life. His family. His heart on the line. That's why his explosion in the courtroom carried so much weight. It wasn't strategic or controlled. It was raw, emotional, and deeply human, the kind of reaction only a father fighting for his child could have. And yet, for all the chaos of that moment, the story was far from over. King was still at a crossroads. He was still forming his identity, still deciding whose voice mattered most. T.I. could guide him, fight for him, and try to shield him, but he couldn't choose his path for him. That was the most terrifying part. Because if King chose wrong, the consequences wouldn't just affect him, they would ripple through the entire family. Boosie, for his part, wasn't backing down. He had always thrived in controversy, feeding off headlines and social media uproar. Being labeled a manipulator didn't bother him. If anything, it added to the mythos he had built around himself. But that same indifference made him a dangerous presence in King's life. As long as King admired him, as long as he saw him as someone worth listening to, T.I. felt he would always be fighting uphill. The courtroom eruption may have been the loudest moment yet, but it wasn't the final one. The tension between T.I. and Boosie had been simmering for years, and now it was boiling over in ways neither could fully control. The world continued to watch as the situation grew messier and more unpredictable.